Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we start our preview series of all positions for the 2022 NFL Draft, starting with, you guessed at the quarterback position. Thor Nystrom of NBC Sports Edge is going to join me on the show today to talk about this class compared to the Eagles' current QB1, Jalen Hurts.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Friday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase, joining you as always, Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms, available as well in video on YouTube. Hit us up on Twitter as well, at Locked On Birds and at DiBiase. LOE, talking quarterbacks today with Thor Nystrom, one of my favorite follows on Twitter. He's an NFL draft analyst for the NBC Sports Edge. A big fan of Malik Willis, Matt Corral, and Desmond Ridder. I want to get his thoughts about this quarterback class, where he'd rank Jalen Hurts in comparison. Could the Eagles still take one of these guys? If not, what to expect of these prospects coming to the next level in the NFL. I think this class can really teach you a lot about the evaluation process and what is considered a good quarterback class and what isn't. You know, what not to do, not to group prospects together. Are there guys in this class that can be stars? You know, I feel like in the past there have been classes that aren't seen that great that churn out top tier talent, and others that are seen incredible that don't have that, and then vice versa. So it's going to be an interesting conversation coming up in segment 2. But before we get into that, we got to talk about, as we're talking quarterbacks today, the rumor that Kyler Murray could be available for a trade eventually from the Arizona Cardinals, and if the Eagles would be interested. So right now, the Cardinals say they're not trading Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray reportedly won't ask for a trade. They're trying to I think they're going to eventually try to get a long-term deal done. But Tom Pelissero did report the Cardinals have yet to make an offer to Murray, and other teams are monitoring the situation. Also, we heard that Murray has no intention of playing next year on the current rookie deal he has that would give him $5.5 million in 2022. So while I don't think Kyler Murray is going to go anywhere, I think eventually this will work itself out. At the same time, like, you've heard some things. Teams are monitoring the situation. Murray's camp did say they wanted a deal done before the draft because if they were going to ask for a trade, it would be before the 28th of April. And to me, it's like, where there's smoke, there's some fire. I mean, this isn't just any negotiation with a quarterback. This has been messy with Kyler, his team, posting that awful PR statement about all his accolades and why he should get paid right now. And just this like exchange of, dirty information, Cardinals, sources sending stuff to reporters about how they think Kyler Murray is selfish and he's not a team player. And there's just this back and forth game. And if you wanted this to work long-term, or at least if you had no doubts, like the Bills didn't with Josh Allen, the Chiefs didn't with Patrick Mahomes, heck, even the Eagles didn't after 2018 with Carson Wentz, you wouldn't have this back and forth. Like, this isn't just any negotiation with a quarterback. The amount of drama, back and forths, there's a real disconnect here. So I'm not saying a trade is going to happen, but again, you look at those past deals that have happened. Wentz and the Eagles weren't doing this. So there is some smoke to this, 100%. There's a reason that teams are monitoring this situation. If Kyler's holding out and if the Cardinals just refuse to pay him, which I don't know if that's going to happen, but if that did transpire, trade talks are going to heat up. And if I were the Eagles, look, it's tougher. This isn't the same as should you trade for Russell Wilson. This is more along the lines of, to a lesser degree, should you trade for Deshaun Watson? Because there's a lot of baggage that could come with this situation. But I would risk it. Unlike Watson, I'm risking it for Kyler. This is a 24-year-old with that kind of mobility and arm strength and consistent improvement each and every year. A guy that for the first half of the season last year was an MVP candidate before injuries to him and the team really derailed the season for the second year in a row. Considering the path that the Eagles are on right now, how tough it looks to find that kind of player. And with the picks they do have that they could give up for this kind of guy, look, I'm concerned about the character stuff too, especially in Philadelphia. How would Kyler Murray, if he is this, player they say he is in the locker room, How would he handle the toughest quarterback market? I think fan base wise, media, the organization itself in the league. I don't know if that would work. I'm nervous about that, but look, I would still take the shot. I mean, he's 24 years old and you have the assets the next 2 drafts where you don't have to give up 4 years worth of compensation. I just think it would make sense and I would take the risk because although I'm a little concerned because you haven't seen Cardinals players defend Kyler, even to the degree that Eagles players defended Wentz after all those articles came out in 2018 and 2019. And even this year, some Colts players like Darius Leonard, Jonathan Taylor, Ryan Kelly came to his defense. It's hard to say because it's he said, she said about inside situations, especially in the locker room. So I don't know who Kyler Murray is as a leader, but the fact that you don't hear that is tough. So who knows about that situation? And it makes it concerning and it might make the Eagles a little hesitant to make this move, but I don't know. I would do it. You guys know I'm willing to do whatever it takes to find that quarterback and hope that he matures or hope that the situation is just overblown and this is a negotiation tactic and both sides are just trying to garner any sort of leverage they can against the other. Not to mention, too, the Eagles would have a much better shot at Kyler Murray than they did when it comes to Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson. Murray does not have a no-trade clause in this rookie deal, not allowed to have that. Although if he said, I'm not coming to Philadelphia, they're not going to trade for him. That's player empowerment, especially at quarterback. But I think they'd have a much better shot. I think he would be seeing Philadelphia, if he's going to be traded, as one of the better destinations. You know, they don't have Denver in play anymore or Cleveland. Like, those are some really good teams with good rosters. Washington, you know, they have their situation taken care of. Indianapolis, those are 4 playoff contenders that needed quarterbacks to take that next step that already filled the holes. You know, they're going to have competition, I think, if this were to happen. Carolina, New Orleans, Atlanta, maybe even Pittsburgh. You know, those kind of teams would definitely be in play. And maybe some of them are seen as better spots, but the Eagles would be seen as much more of a top candidate for Kyler than they were for Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson. Heck, if Aaron Rodgers was ever going to consider a trade, you know, the Eagles weren't really seen as a legitimate threat. But for Kyler, I think it would be different, and they have among the most to offer in the NFL. And Arizona is not going to trade him to a team like Seattle. I don't think Kyler Murray is going to get traded. I don't know if the Eagles would be interested. I would be, and I think they would definitely give it some thought. You know, this isn't Russell Wilson, like, yes, make the move, but it's also not Deshaun Watson where it's like, stay away from that situation. I guess you just have to trust the sources you do collect the information with if the scenario came out about who Kyler is, because on the field, I really don't have much doubts about his talent. We're going to get into the 2022 quarterback class, though, coming up next. I want to compare it to Jalen Hurts and preview the class as a whole, because although the Eagles did trade down with the Saints, they traded the 16th overall pick in 19 for the 18th pick, a third, a couple late round picks, and then a first next year and a second the year after. It does seem like the Eagles are showing their hand that they're going to give Jalen Hurts 2022. If he's not the guy, they'll find their guy in the 2023 class or the trade market, like Kyler Murray potentially. However, that trade does not stop them from taking a quarterback this year if they do recognize somebody as the franchise guy that's worth taking a chance on over Jalen Hurts and over a 2023 prospect. So it is still worth considering this class, at least for a few more shows. We're going to talk to Thor Nystrom of NBC Sports Edge to preview the 2022 quarterback class coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, today's show is sponsored by BetOnline, the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting needs, including the NFL draft, the NBA playoffs. You had March Madness. You've got the MLB season now, the push for the playoffs in the NHL. BetOnline has you covered with all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and so much more. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Make sure you bet on who you think the Eagles are going to pick, how many quarterbacks could go in the first round, other positions, so much to offer at BetOnline, because BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back in to this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. I am your host, Louis DiBiase, getting ready to talk with NBC Sports Edge NFL draft analyst Thor Nystrom. But guys, before I do that, just want to let you know about a big announcement starting Thursday, April 28th. Make sure you tune in to Locked On NFL Draft's live coverage of the 2022 NFL Draft with all 3 days of real-time analysis from our extensive lineup of experts and insiders. And for those of you dying to know who your team's going to take, make sure you catch Odyssey and Locked On's NFL Mock Draft Special, hosted by Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, all week leading up to the first pick. Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, let's get into this conversation I had with Thor Nystrom, an NFL draft analyst for NBC Sports Edge, to preview the 2022 quarterback class. Where would he rank Jalen Hurts compared to the likes of Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Desmond Ridder, Kenny Pickett? Let's get into it right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back into this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Really excited about our next guest on the show, somebody I've been following for a while. We see pretty eye to eye on these quarterback prospects. He is a draft analyst for NBC Sports Edge. It's Thor Nystrom at ThorKU on Twitter. Thor, thanks for joining the show. Good to talk to you for the first time in person, kind of.
You too, brother. Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've been part of the Malik Willis hype train, right? Almost leading it the last few months.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I guess you would say the rest of the industry was a bit slow initially to sort of get on Malik, but they got there eventually.
I totally agree. And what I want to talk with you about today, Thor, is this 2022 quarterback class compared specifically to Jalen Hurts. And again, I feel like we see this class kind of the same way, especially our belief in Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Desmond Ridder, more so compared to, Kenny Pickett, Carson Strong, Sam Howell, and those guys. I don't know. Do you feel like this class is getting a little more hate than it deserves? I feel like other classes that weren't seen as historic came out with stars. 2017, Patrick Mahomes now is one of the greatest in the league. He's maybe the greatest, but he wasn't seen as a, sure bet thing. So I don't know. I feel like this class maybe is a little better than people think. Maybe there isn't like a number one overall pick kind of guy, but I don't know. Malik Willis is pretty damn close.
I agree with all that. Yeah. And I think it is getting too much. You said the word hate. I do think it's getting too much hate. Like the sort of narrative is that there isn't any worthy quarterbacks in this class. I don't agree with that. In comparison to last year, for sure it's down, right? And in comparison to a couple of these years we've had, it's down. But, like the depth of it, just apples to apples compared to last year, the depth of this quarterback class is better than last year. Last year fell off a shelf after that top five.
Sure.
I didn't like any of those day two guys. Davis Mills has been a little bit better than I thought, but let's just say that Kellen Mond and Kyle Trask, they are who we thought they were. This class, I think for teams that are drafting in day two, you can get legitimate prospects on day two, this year. Carson Strong, I think. Sam Howell is a legitimate post-hype sleeper. And then, you mentioned the guys at the top. I happen to think that Malik Willis is an elite prospect. If you combine the two classes this year and last year, I'd put him behind only Lawrence. So I do think that this class is a bit better than it's been given credit for.
And Thor, I feel like you have to, I don't know, I think everybody gets grouped in together with a class. I think each year you have to take each prospect individually. I mean, look how many first round picks that weren't seen as locks turned out the next level to be a lock that is a star at the quarterback position. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, like I said, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert in 2020. I think Malik Willis, I love that you mentioned that you think outside of Trevor Lawrence, he's one of your favorite prospects over the last few years. I don't think even just for a weaker class this year, he's the best of a bad bunch. I think he has as much upside as anybody coming into the league. You could compare that to the last five classes.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, I've said this numerous times during the pre-draft process, but the only guy in NFL history at the quarterback position who's come into the league with comparable physical tools to Malik Willis, it's Michael Vick.
Yep.
For me, there is only one guy you can compare him to. Before his redshirt junior year at Liberty, I was comping him to Lamar Jackson at that time, just because over the last decade, those two guys stand alone and way above everybody else as rushing threats at that level. Yeah. And I'm talking empirically, eye test, the data, stats, anything you want to look at that bears out. But Malik Willis has more juice in that arm than Lamar does. He does. Now, Lamar was a bit more polished as a passer than he was because, Lamar was lucky enough that he got to spend his entire career in the Earhart-Perkins system, the same offensive system that for instance, the Patriots run. But, whereas Malik Willis, first of all, he didn't start at Auburn because he was behind, Pat Nix's, grandson or whatever.
Right.
And then he had to go to Liberty, where he didn't play with any NFL talent in this sort of playground style offense. But even though it was a playground style offense, it absolutely had a bunch of NFL throws in it, testing down the field, and then the out stuff towards the sidelines, 10 to 20 yards. And while people say, oh, he has all these accuracy issues, he was the class's most accurate quarterback on the 10 to 20 yard stuff outside the hashes, and he was one of the most accurate down the field, and that accounted for like 21% of his passes last year. So you have to keep that context in mind. You can't just say he's inaccurate and he's super duper raw as a passer without mentioning the fact that he is better at NFL throws than anyone in this class.
I totally agree. Do you think he goes Detroit second overall, or what right now? Where's your head at with where he's going?
I think he oughta. I think he should. There's been an eerie silence over that with Detroit. Like, you see these in the mock drafts where, like, 1 week it'll be one guy is the flavor of the week for Detroit. Yeah. Another week it's another guy. It's another guy. Malik had it, his run, and then they switched it with Trayvon Walker and then Thibodeau. Nobody knows. Not even the people that are most plugged into Detroit know. This is what I can tell you, though, and I certainly don't have any, insight into the specific thought process of Brad Holmes, because he ain't telling anyone that stuff. He ain't showing his cards. But I can tell you for sure that the Detroit offensive coaching staff absolutely loves Malik Willis. Detroit wanted to coach Malik Willis at the Senior Bowl. They got their wish, and he was one of the most dominant players there. Probably was the most dominant offensive player in Mobile. Mark Brunell loves him, and he's not the only guy on that staff that does.
Thor, I feel like part of what bothers me too with Eagles fans talking about this quarterback class is, like, I think Jalen Hurts, if you rank them, I don't think, compared to Hurts and what their options might be in 2023, to stick your nose up at the 2022 options, like, look, if you're going to be winning 7 to 10 games every year, you eventually got to talk yourself into maybe not even a Malik Willis, but a Desmond Ridder, a Matt Corral, what Josh Allen was coming out of Wyoming, or Patrick Mahomes out of Texas Tech, a mid first round pick that might have a lower floor, but he still has that ceiling. And to me, Hurts compared to this class, I think you can make the argument that a couple of them have more upside. How do you compare Jalen to these prospects? Like, if you had to rank them, with Willis, Ridder, Corral, Pickett, where would he slot in there?
I would put him I'd probably put him quarterback, either 3 or 4. I would definitely have him behind Willis and Corral. Ridder is where it becomes a little bit more tricky than me. But I would have him above Pickett. So he would either be 3 or 4 in my list. The comparison of Hurts to Willis, I think, is really interesting, because I heard, that was sort of the most ubiquitous comp for Malik Willis early on was Jalen Hurts. It was something I was fighting for months, because the thing of it is, Jalen Hurts doesn't have nearly the arm that Malik Willis does. You're talking apples to oranges. It is not even close. And while Malik Willis does run with Jalen Hurts' power, that and he has sort of the same build, I think that's where there's a similarity. Malik Willis is more athletic than he is. So you can't compare those guys as scrambling. Malik Willis is going to be way better than that, than Hurts in the NFL. Where I think it's useful to think about Jalen Hurts, when you're thinking about Malik Willis, is if Jalen Hurts succeeded in the NFL, or if he became a starter as quick as he did, and we agree he's maybe a top, what would you say, Louis, top 20 quarterback?
Yeah, I would say top 20. Like, I don't want to say he's above average, like above that top 16, but I would say top 20, yeah.
So we'll and I agree. So we'll say, he's somewhere, right now between 17 and 20, right? Yep. If that's what Jalen Hurts is this early in his career, how can you say that Malik Willis is this crazy risky prospect? Yeah. If Jalen Hurts made it, there is no chance that Malik Willis does not.
Right.
Because
it's a great
of the utility of his legs.
Because that's the thing, is, like, people are talking about the upside is there, but the floor still isn't there yet with his passing. But it's not for Jalen Hurts either. But that floor is raised when you have that mobility. And Thor, like, I understand the comparison when it comes to the mobility, the power, also the character, the leadership. I do think Malik Willis has all the positives of Jalen, and it's why I think the Eagles should love Willis if he were to fall. I would make a move up. Even if Detroit would bite it too, I'd make the move up, because I think he has everything Hurts has and more, like you mentioned. To compare, though, to the other prospects, like, I want to go to Kenny Pickett real quick. Why do you think, you have Corral and Ridder ranked ahead of him, as do I, but why do you feel like the majority of the consensus is most people I see in mock drafts rankings all have Pickett ahead of Corral and Ridder? I don't know why that really is. I mean, I think it's close, but why it's like so clearly a consensus is interesting.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's because they're not understanding the context of his situation. I cover college football first. That's what I do during the fall. So I get to watch all these guys' careers, day in, day out, follow them, from the recruiting process all the way through. Kenny Pickett, like the hand size is the thing that's always discussed with it. I don't care about the hand size. He played outdoors, for 5 years in Pitt. And he has, I would even say, slightly above average arm strength. It ain't better than that. It's somewhere between average and slightly above average. But the arm strength, he doesn't have a wet noodle. So, toss out the hand size thing. What actually matters, though, is that was a guy that was at Pitt for 4 years, started the end of his true freshman year, and then had the job the next 3 years, did absolutely nothing, was totally nondescript. If he had entered the draft last year, he would have been like a 6th or 7th round pick. And I wouldn't have even been surprised if he would have been a UDFA. The difference between, people were comparing him to Burrow and stuff like that. You didn't see the NFL throws that you did with Burrow with Kenny Pickett last year. Last year, when Kenny Pickett took off, it was because everything was perfect around him. He had one of the nation's best receiving corps. It went 5 deep, not 4 deep. It went 5 deep. The number one guy in that, Jordan Addison's one of the best receivers in the nation. He's a guy we're going to be talking about a ton next year for the draft. And a whole bunch of Kenny Pickett's production were these quick throws sideline to sideline that then opened up down the field. If you look at the production that Jordan Addison got on catches within like 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, it's absolutely ridiculous. So like Kenny Pickett, his completion percentage was artificially propped up. The yak he was given by those guys was way artificially propped up. And then he was given some free throws downfield because think about it, Louis, like the Pittsburgh offense, you had the trips to the side and they're doing like the diamond thing over there and they throw it to the guy in the back, invariably Addison. You'd have a blocking tight end out in front of, like Kroll or whatever, the kid in this class, and then one of the other receivers. You do that enough times and you nick the defense for 6, 7, 8 free yards every single time. The defense has to bring up multiple defensive backs. You don't have a choice. You must stop that. And once they started doing that, well, all of a sudden now the routes would start to flower out, right? Like instead of just blocking right away, now we're going downfield, and they did these sort of level things, and it opened up these one-on-one shots downfield. Kenny Pickett, his production was super duper artificially inflated, not just because of the guys around him. Pitt also got incredibly lucky with their scheduling last year. The ACC was way down, and they didn't play anyone in the non-con. I went through Pitt's schedule last year, just looking at the defenses, the SP Plus rankings of those, aggregated them and averaged them out. Last year, before he opted out of the bowl game, Kenny Pickett played at the average of the number 80 SP Plus defense every single week with that loaded offense around him. He was playing these bottom 50 defenses in the entire NCAA. I just think a lot of it was propped up, and I don't think he's the prospect that other people do.
And I've seen, with Matt Corral, I think he makes throws that you just did not see from Kenny Pickett on film. And, Thor, you mentioned specifically that you think outside of Malik Willis, Matt Corral is the only other quarterback in this class that shows a top 10 ceiling. And I agree. He's such an interesting prospect, though. Like, I think that there is a lot of legitimate concerns, but there's also a lot to like about him. What do you think of him as a prospect? Like, what are your few biggest concerns with him? And what is it that you think gives him that top 10 ceiling?
So my biggest concern with him is it's the progression thing, like because it was sort of a similar offense to like that Sam Howell played in, where it's like you're more gauging the defense pre-snap so that you don't have to do it when the bullets are flying. So you're figuring out where your number advantage is. And then the decision with where the ball is, where it's going, it's usually decided by the deep safety where his first couple steps this way or that way. Because you'll either get the one-on-one shot on the one side, or you're going to have a big number advantage on the other side. That's sort of what the Kiffin offense, the Longo offense, even the Levy offense now that they do. And so he didn't get to do as much of the, going from one side to the other. He was very good at running that scheme. But in 2020, in particular, when defensive coordinators started to take away that first option and that second option, you would see him self-destruct. The great example of this is when they played Arkansas.
Yep.
Barry Odom, the defensive coordinator there, someone should have thought of this before Barry Odom did, but Barry Odom had the genius idea. We're going to drop 8 guys this whole game, Matt, and we're going to take away Elijah Moore, and we're going to try to take away Kenny Yeboah too. So have fun. You can do whatever you like, but we're not going to let you beat us with those 2 guys. And those guys got over 50% of the market share that year for Ole Miss. Well, Matt Corral, he didn't know what to do. He was glitching. He was confused. He was throwing the ball into chest plates of linebackers. You saw him, this compounding of mistakes. In the LSU game, in the downpour, you saw a little bit of that too. This year, things were different. Whereas last year, 13 of his 14 interceptions came in just 3 of his 10 games played. This year, you didn't see the compounding of those mistakes. You didn't see him. One other thing, I didn't see him throw the ball when he was confused. That was the very concerning thing about 2020, when he was very clearly didn't know what to do with it. He would just chuck it. This past season, Matt Corral was like, all right, y'all want to drop 8 on me? Fine. I'll steal 7 yards with scrambles every single play. So that's what he do. Just leave the pocket, take his 7 yards, and that's how it would go. Made it much harder to defend him. Even though Ole Miss had this crappy receiving core this past, I don't think much of the 2 guys that are in the draft. Ole Miss's receiving core dropped a billion balls last year, and they couldn't be trusted. But even despite that, Corral, he slashed his turnover-worthy plays by PFF by like a third this past season. So even though you saw that the ADOT just drop a little bit, and the yards per completion drop a little bit, you got to keep in mind the context around it. But as far as the stuff you like about him, big league arm, absolute big league arm. The thing that surprised me the most about him when he started out playing college is he comes onto this field. He's sort of a little guy, which is one of the things that you're sort of concerned about. I think he started his career at like 190, maybe even 185. But the ball just detonates out of his hand. It's different than with some of these other small guys. He has top 3 arm strength in the class. I put it with Malik. He's not at Malik Willis' level, but in the top 3 with him. And then Carson Strong is the other guy that I would put there. Yeah. You have the arm talent, and then the other thing is that dual threat element. He can get outside of the pocket. He can steal those yards. He ain't going to take it to the house like Malik Willis.
I just don't want him to take on 3 defenders anymore, Thor. I think that's part of it. You watch that Arkansas film from last year, and he's lowering in the shoulder, and I love the competitiveness, but Eagles fans know with Carson Wentz, pick and choose your battles sometimes, especially when you're not that size,
It's a great point. That's 1,000%. I think that's the other major thing with him is he is such a gamer. And by the way, speaking to the gamer thing, he battled injuries all last year, in part because exactly the thing that you're talking about. He would leave and he's going down on the sword every single time. Like you said, lower the shoulder. He doesn't love to slide. He literally fights for yards as like 195 pound guy against 240 pound linebackers and stuff. But goes through the season, struggling with playing through the injuries, and then probably should have opted out of the bowl game. But he's such a gamer that he wanted to play, and it suffers the high ankle sprain. That's why his process has started late. But in the NFL, he absolutely needs to start getting down, or he's gonna take some hits that he's not gonna be able to get up from.
The Eagles have met with him twice at the Combine and then official top 30 visit. I know they traded down with the Saints to collect a 2023 first-round pick, but with the Eagles, you never know. 2020 is the perfect example. Thor Nystrom of NBC Sports Edge joining us on Locked On Eagles today to preview the 2022 quarterback class, especially in comparison to the Eagles' current quarterback, Jalen Hurts. Follow him on Twitter at ThorKU. Thor, it was great to have you on the show, man, and hopefully we can do this again down the road.
Absolutely. Would love to. Appreciate you, brother.
Today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Built Bar. It's a protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. You're not going to find another protein bar out there like Built Bar. Covered in 100% chocolate. It's soft, easy to chew. It's all of the flavor of your guilty pleasure. The Hershey's bar, Reese's Cup, Nestle Crunch, whatever it is. But it's none of the guilt because Built Bars only contain, most of them, 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Best of all, Built Bar has so many delicious flavors, one for every taste bud. Mint brownie, coconut almond. New for this month, you've got white chocolate, cookies, and cream. Also, try out their marshmallow infused protein bars, their puff bars. They've got cinnamon churro flavors, banana cream pie. You're never going to find a protein bar with so much variety and flavor like Built Bar. Make sure you head over to the website built.com, and with your next order, use the promo code LOCKED15. It's LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your order. Once again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Welcome back in, Eagles fans, to this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much to Thor Nystrom of NBC Sports Edge for joining the show, previewing this 2022 quarterback class. Some really interesting stuff he had to say about, Matt Corral, Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis in comparison to Jalen Hurts. I think he's higher on this class than most are. And interesting that he said he would rank Hurts after he would go Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Jalen Hurts, Desmond Ridder, and Kenny Pickett as his top 5. Interesting. I would disagree a little bit. So my rankings of Jalen Hurts against the 2022 prospects, you guys know I'd have Malik Willis number 1. I'd go Matt Corral number 2. So I do agree with his top 2 there 100%. I really like that he likes Corral and Ridder more than Pickett. Again, it's bothered me, and maybe it's groupthink, maybe it's the safety of Pickett and the nervousness of these other prospects for some analysts and fans alike. But to me, I don't get the logic of taking Pickett in the first round, and makes the same sense as Mac Jones last year. I just don't think the ceiling's there where he'll ever justify taking him. Whereas Ridder and Corral, maybe they're riskier. I think Corral's riskier. I don't think Ridder is, but I think both of them have a much higher ceiling. So I have Willis and Corral as 1-2 when I'm comparing the 2022 prospects to Hurts. Then number 3, Thor had Hurts ahead of Ridder. I would probably put Ridder ahead of Hurts. I think he's just as good of an athlete in the open field. I think he is a bigger quarterback. I think he has a better arm. I think he's already a better processor coming out of Cincinnati than Jalen is. So to me, Ridder and Hurts are close, but because I don't think Ridder has any truly elite trait. I think he's pretty close. He has a bunch of very good traits that could turn elite. But at the same time, I do get why Hurts would be closer to Ridder, more so compared to Willis and Corral. I would prefer Ridder over Hurts, but maybe the Eagles would see it as maybe we like Ridder ahead of Jalen, but we don't like him so much more than Jalen, where we want to restart, take Ridder, and not see what Hurts could do next year, and have the options of the 2023 class and where we could find a bunch of guys just as good as Ridder too. We'd rather have Hurts and the field over Desmond Ridder. But again, if it's in a vacuum where I'm just ranking everybody against each other, it's Willis, Corral, Desmond Ridder number 3. I would have Jalen Hurts number 4. I like him a lot more than I like Kenny Pickett. And then, you put Carson Strong and Sam Howell there at the bottom. So it's really interesting. Again, that's why I don't understand. I get the issues with this quarterback class, and there's not an Andrew Luck. There's not a Trevor Lawrence, surefire number 1 overall pick, although I think Malik Willis does fit that box. I don't think the NFL sees it that way, and I do understand that. But from an Eagles perspective, to have this, sticking your nose up at it kind of mentality, considering the other options you're going to have, Jalen Hurts, the 2023 class, if it's not CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, to me, Malik Willis, Matt Corral, even Desmond Ridder present as much upside, if not more. And you guys know I've said that before on the show. So again, I'm not saying, yes, no matter what, you have to take one of these guys over Hurts or next year's class. No, not at all, because I think Jalen has a similar ceiling to Desmond Ridder. I like Ridder better, but Hurts is close. I think he's better than Kenny Pickett. So I completely understand it. And I get with Corral the risks that you might prefer Jalen over Corral. So I understand it, but to think the Eagles should never consider this class, even with the trade that they made with the Saints, I still think they should really take a serious look at it, especially if, what I think is going to happen does not happen. The Detroit Lions don't take Malik Willis. Maybe they go Aiden Hutchinson, or maybe they go Kayvon Thibodeau or Trayvon Walker. And maybe that happens. And maybe, the Seahawks pass and they go with Baker Mayfield, or the Carolina Panthers do. So they don't take quarterbacks. And suddenly Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Desmond Ridder start to fall down the board. It's something still to consider. That's all I'm saying, is because I feel like Corral, Ridder, Willis, they're all among the same potential as who the Eagles' options will be from a draft perspective when it comes to who their next franchise quarterback is going to be. But it's a super interesting conversation. The Eagles have met with Matt Corral twice over the last month and a half too. So, it's making everybody think and reignite this conversation. And again, 2020 showed the Eagles are willing to do things in an unorthodox way at the quarterback position. So As my buddy Lawrence, one of our good listeners, tweeted out the other day, you're going to be sweating this out until these quarterbacks are off the board or until the Eagles take another position. Until they get the guy, I'm going to believe they could do anything. And so I can't wait for the draft. That was previewing, though, the 2022 quarterback class. We've got running back still, receiver, tight end, the offensive line, all of the defensive positions as well over the next 2 weeks as we get you ready for the NFL draft on April 28th. Subscribe to the show wherever you get the podcast in audio form, video on YouTube. Subscribe to our Locked On Eagles YouTube channel and always follow us on Twitter at Locked On Birds and at DiBiase, LOE. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker. They bring the draft to life every day with a ton of insight on these prospects. As always, thank you for downloading the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thank you for listening and watching, and let's go Birds.